Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Scaling Ventures for the love of the game. We're building a portfolio of niche vertical SaaS firms that punch like Megatron. And I'm back with my boy Kjael, and today's a good one. It's like a little generally connects and kind of an extension of the last post where we talked about kind of 3x foundational marketing sprints to get going, get something going from nothing and start to see results as soon as humanly possible. And the big kind of sensitivity there, or there's a lot of assumptions. And so like all things, kind of take it in your own context. But I guess, Achilles heel of that thought process is that it treats channels in isolation. And there's a ton of blur and gray area, as we had talked about. And it's very difficult to isolate channels. It's not the days of let's put a billboard on Broadway and a billboard on Main Street, and we'll see which one generates more foot traffic. And then we'll buy more billboards on which street. Nowadays, buyer journeys are crazy and all over the place. And there's all these touch points. So you can treat it
multi-touch and multi-threaded.
Totally. So you can treat today as like an evolution of that thinking, or you could jump straight there where you're actually experimenting with growth systems instead of experimenting with channels. But needless to say, that V1 is still productive, still useful. You'll gather data, you'll get smarter, you're going to action a bunch of resources, get a bunch of people on the same page very, very quickly. So I highly recommend. But this, you could maybe think of like a 2.0, or like we're a little more evolved than that. You could jump to this. So the headline is From Channels to Systems, How Firms Evolve to Build Growth Loops That Compound.
Ooh.
A table of contents. We will talk the evolution problem, aka when a channel testing isn't enough. We'll talk about why growth systems outperform channel experiments, if you need any more persuasion than what was already said. And then we'll get into the anatomy of a growth loop. And there are some different flavors of this. So, all the rage is kind of product level growth loops where you have like this baked in virality in your product and it just grows itself overnight. And that leads right into kind of system level experimentation. So we'll touch on 2 battle tested growth loops to consider: measuring loop performance without losing that channel clarity. And you'll start to see why like the channel frame always will stay important. And then a quick hit implementation guide with some final thoughts and action items. How's that sound, Kev?
No, that sounds amazing. I'm actually excited that we took the turn on evolving into looking at systems being the culmination of the channels we're executing. So I'm excited for today's conversation.
And thinking systems, always thinking systems.
Always
and I guess
thinking
just
systems.
to articulate that, like generally the key hallmark of a system is when considering inputs and outputs is the first thing, and then kind of considering conditional treatment that impacts the input through the outputs. And then when you start to think about really cool systems, there's a loop involved. So in things that compound over time, the inputs turn to outputs, which become inputs.
Yeah,
And we'll
closed
have an
feedback loop.
and that's a confusing thing, and we'll bring it to life here. But so what are the hallmarks of like, all right, we're kind of at this place now where we need to think differently. The first is kind of fragmented efforts. So you've got several channels working that are, generally independent. They don't reinforce each other over time. So that's the first thing, where it's like we have these kind of linear, put one unit in, get one unit out, or some type of kind of structural exchange that are running on a straight line, and they run independent of each other. So you're not seeing any kind of exponential growth. You're not seeing anything that kind of an exponential, meaning not linear. Exponential is a curve that goes upward. It can go downward too, but we're not interested in structural exponential decline. And if there's very much like a finish line mentality. So it's like, hey, we got to the end of this campaign. We got to the end of this thing. Let's measure the results. You want to be building persistent systems. And it's okay to blend in opportunistic campaigns, which would be like, hey, we know this competitor is really flailing. Let's go hard. More kind of repeatable but not persistent campaigns would be like, hey, we're going to circle back with all the deals we lost last year of this kind of flavor because now we've got a different story to tell. So you want to generally index towards building persistent systems, but don't be afraid to sprinkle in some fun stuff that's kind of quick hit, opportunistic, or more kind of recurring seasonal type stuff. When this thing is buzzing, or I guess the hallmarks of success when you're not in that place is that marketing activities become reinforced, so they're no longer isolated. And an example of this would be your podcast feeds your social content, which powers your outbound, which generates podcast guests. So that is a closed loop that compounds. Assets become compounding, not deprecating. So content leads to an audience, and authority accumulates over time, then resetting with each campaign. So another, like obviously compounding would be like when we get into content, there's tons of distribution methods that really give you kind of high leverage on long form or just like high value assets. And measurement becomes system focused. So you're not just like thinking you're fixating on a channel. The channels are the things you measure, but you put it in the context of the system. So it's like, how is this growth loopy thing going? And I just want to distinguish that the growth loops that we're going to discuss, Reforge, there's a bunch of thought leaders, Kyle Poirier, Elena, who think much more about like kind of this convergence of product manager, growth manager, where you're embedding a lot of the elements that drive growth into the product itself. That's very hard, and not very many products provide that kind of opportunity. The hallmark, like I guess the OGs that kind of created a lot of this excitement were like DocuSign, where when you send a document to someone to sign it, they see it and they're like, oh shit, DocuSign's useful, I'm going to use it. Or, somebody tries Slack, they use it with a team member, then all of a sudden, or one person, then all of a sudden the team's using it, then the firm's using it. So we call that kind of baked in virality in the product, where it spreads as a function of using it. And that's very rare. So this is going to be mostly for the sales and marketing and growth manager type folks, and less kind of like that intersection of very modern kind of nuanced product and growth. Cool, Kjael?
Sounds perfect.
All right. Why growth systems outperform channel experiments? So your offer and ICP are known. So distribution is the variable, right? And so it's basically like we've got good, and there's a million flavors of measuring, product market fit and all that other stuff. But it's like, we're not just testing this one thing, we're testing a message plus medium equals desired behavior. And that implies that you need to start to think in systems. Your stage demands compounding efforts. So it's like, what we're doing is creating linear. And when we say linear results, it's almost always diminishing returns, because channels get beat up, or at least the growth rate of a channel will decline, because every incremental unit of growth, as we've spoken about a lot, becomes harder. Same way, like weight loss, every pound gets harder. The first 10 pounds, they come off. Same on the other side, growth rips, and then it's like, oh man, we're kind of hitting a plateau.
And then I was going to add and say, like, the last thing you want to do at the end of that is, now you have your growth plateau. You spent all this time that's been compounded into this one channel, and now you have to restart from scratch with a new channel experiment. You're kind of just delaying that maximized output or the outcome that you're looking for by just testing channels in a silo. And in addition to that, when you think about how users behave, even to become aware of something, there's typically a series of touch points that they have to come across before they're actually educated about your product and even interested. So when you test your channels in silo, it's kind of like you're only testing one touch point at a time. It's like, hey, does this work? Does this work? And from a systems perspective, what you're really trying to figure out is which touch points matter the most, resonate the most with our users, and how many of those touch points are required before this person's super bought in on what we're saying.
Totally. So another way is like, you're trying here. Let's pull up this visual. This is pretty handy here, or we'll just start to get a little screen share going. Can you see that one, Kjael?
Yes, sir.
All right. So the big one here, and so we have, for the listeners, kind of two columns in a table. On the left side is a channel-only experiment. On the right side is a growth systems experiment. So in a channel-only experiment, you're testing a single motion, like a cold email. Whereas in a system experiment, you're testing a full journey, which is like message, call to action, conversion, or kind of trigger behavior. On the channel side, results may be isolated, whereas on the growth side, learnings are compounding and transferable. So it's like, we're testing a lead magnet across these channels. You can draw some, you want to be careful how many variables you introduce in an experiment. We got to keep our scientific method hat on. But it's like, we're going to test the lead magnet, and then we can introduce the surface area and the distribution channels that we're utilizing. So the learning is much more, there's a higher magnitude of learning across everything. Channel experiments are focused but brittle, whereas growth systems are generally resilient and very scalable if it works, because there's this compounding element. Channels are easier to launch but slower to evolve. Systems, and this is back to kind of like how you interpret this as like an extension of the last session that we hung on, or an evolution. So growth system experiments, by contrast, are more complex, but they accelerate insight and impact. So it's more stuff to coordinate, but the juice is for surely worth the squeeze.
1000%.
All right, so let's talk about the anatomy of a growth loop now. And in this context, you want to be, so they're more resource intense, as we just kind of agreed, these system level experiments versus channel experiments. So ideally, you want to run experiments in parallel. So it's like, we're going to try A and we're going to try B. And at the end of this defined agreeable observation period, we're going to draw conclusions on whether we should continue with A or B. So you're basically establishing two growth systems that you want to run in parallel. And this is where it starts to get kind of heady. And if you do it right, those two systems kind of help each other as well. And they should be very well researched. Like you should have a lot of conviction around like, these are the two systems we want to experiment. And here's the data we were able to gather to substantiate our points of view on these things. So it's a high probability that you want to maintain both. You just want to see which one rips so that you can allocate resources as you go. And it's also very likely, as is the case in this example, that one is going to be quick and very actionable, and others a little bit of a slower burn or requires more kind of momentum. So all to say, the components of a growth loop experiment is a hypothesis, which is basically a belief about what problem, message, or offer will resonate with your ICP. For example, operations leaders will engage with tools that quantify manual efficiency. Then there's a loop, which is a coordinated set of activities across 2 to 3 channels designed to test that hypothesis. And then you actually the actual experiments. So we're going to tactical execution nestled within each loop. For instance, cold email, LinkedIn post, podcast, lead magnets, whatever. And then a measurement plan, duh. And the thing that's there is it needs to be shared. So you want to be able to have observable signals that are applicable to both if you can. That's the holy grail. It's a little tough to get there in some contexts. And then there's an iteration cadence. And the most important thing is to give something the time it deserves to observe results. And the one that's like the real curveball is like, we're going to go super hard at an SEO content thing. You're probably giving that like a year.
Realistically.
Like to figure out if it works. Because it's like, that's the one where it's like, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. You achieve some kind of critical mass and it's like, boom! Holy shit, good thing we kept doing SEO content.
Yep, and that's where I was going to comment earlier that even though you might be doing this in an A/B testing framework, you're going to start to quickly notice that there's some of those systematic experiments where the results don't come till later. So maybe we put more effort and resources into the systems that give us results right now, and nominally kind of identify how do we allocate time and energy to these systems that will give us the results later on. Because again, they all overlap in some way. The same users that hit the touch points or the channels within this one system may also touch the same channels in the other system. So let them both work for you in a way that one is giving you results today and the other one is guaranteeing results 6 months from now, and just keep monitoring.
Very well said. And like the usual suspects for super high frequency, like I guess usually it's a function of frequency, like how quickly you can measure and get to a place where there are results. And the most high frequency stuff is cold email, which is why all our inboxes suck, and paid ads. So you can serve up 10,000 variants of ads, 50 a day. Like that's just a function of budget, but you can learn really fast that way. So anyway, on to the 2 battle tested growth loops to consider. Growth loop 1, we're calling the content led system in this context. And it's basically a narrative into awareness into a response. And the one here would be a podcast where you're kind of articulating a point of view that's unique. It's probably a point of view on how to execute the best in your category or what the real pain points are in your category. You either want to, like, you need to define, or you're pursuing thought leadership to the degree that it helps you direct the product in the most elite way, because you understand tactically, strategically, outcomes, priority, all of that so well, you can produce the tool that gets you to those desired outcomes the fastest. Or you understand the pain so well that you're the best at fixing. Like as we've said before, a problem well defined is half solved. So in this case, go ahead.
I would say it another way. I would call this the social selling system for sales leaders. You're not going directly with just cold outbound emails with your newest AE to cut their fingers and experiment on. No, you are establishing yourself as the thought leader, the authority as it relates to this content and how you fix the problem. You are now the best at fixing this problem. Great. Now that you've gotten everyone's attention and you're educated on that, here's the actual solution to fix that problem. This is what you're doing. Yeah.
100%. So it's a podcast or some type of long form that feeds into organic on LinkedIn. And then you use kind of signal from the engagement with LinkedIn to generate cold outbound, which in that case is not that cold. It's like, yo, like we're just, you're engaging with the conversation we're trying to create. And oh, by the way, that is a signal to us, you have this pain or you're trying to solve this problem. We're pretty good at it. Here's the tool. So let's talk strengths and trade-offs. Strengths, authority-led creates long tail compounding value. So this is the kind of halo effect. Maximizes founder or whoever that kind of thought leader voice is and narrative control, and it's ideal for strategic positioning and inbound growth. The trade-offs, which you can probably guess, a lot more production, prep time, blah, blah, blah. Signal can take longer to materialize without any ad budget behind it. You can totally put some ad budget behind this, and it needs consistent execution. So this is like probably the one you get going after the next one that we'll talk about.
This is your long-term plan. The one for
This is
results
like a
in 6
long
months.
tail. Yeah. All right. Growth loop 2 is this rep-led account-based ABM, common term, just another acronym for those that are a little bit new to SaaS, which is basically like, we're going to define the 100 humans on the planet that we have the best chance of getting a first date with based on whatever factors. So this loop focuses on direct outreach to like high probability, which is a function of observable features, and supporting kind of that conversation with a really value-driven asset, which Hormozy and the rest of the world has made infamous as lead magnets. So you want to give away something for free that solves a very specific problem and is useful as hell. So lead magnets they're a lot of work, but man, they're productive. So in this context, cold outbound to highly targeted folks. And again, this is not spray and pray. This is like the 100 people that we think we have above a 90% chance of getting a first date with. You're going to point that outbound towards a lead magnet and just give as much value as you possibly can. If they engage with the lead magnet, now you have some surface area to retarget with ads. So one quick thing here to mention is you start to see how these systems can compound as they run in parallel. So phenomenal, or it's like we have the cold, like, or maybe a podcast drop was absolutely elite and just shared some absolutely profound insight into the category, into your whatever. That's a great thing to introduce into that outbound. Or, maybe the ads point towards the podcast. So you can start to see how these things kind of intertwine.
Yep.
Strengths here, super high velocity, fast signal with relatively light setup, easier to A/B test all kinds of stuff, message variants, blah, blah, blah. And it should yield some short-term pipeline pretty quick. So in terms of sequencing, we should have started with this one first, but this is probably something like this is where you want to start. And then you want to complement that with something that's a longer term kind of strategic asset that, you guessed it, serves back into the thing that you just got going. Let's talk success metrics, shall we?
We shall.
All right. So system level metrics, you want to look at the full funnel conversion, which is basically like, how is this loop converting from awareness to opportunity, and then ultimately, depending on your sales cycle time, to revenue, and then to retention. So you want to get all the way through to lifetime value. That's the name of the game. Compounding rate.
If we pause there at full funnel conversion, remember to take a look at the bow tie model in the revenue architect. There are conversion rates at every stage of the funnel. Please have those fully mapped out and understand what it is you're measuring.
Totally. And there's time-based rates and then there's volume-based rates. So just think about those two things. It's like, what was the time that it took to get to this outcome? Or of this many, how many made it to this thing? It's really kind of two flavors. Cool. So compounding rate, and this is interesting. It's like our key assets, like audience, engagement, response rates, is that stuff kind of swelling over time in a nonlinear fashion. Then you're like, ooh, oh boy, the more we run this thing, the more this thing grows too. And they're both growing like crazy. And it's like, oh, buddy, we got something. We got something. And then velocity, how quickly does the loop generate the results? So that's kind of what we're all about, or what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
Channel level metrics. So there's some different ways in awareness, interest, conversion, inbound. You could slice this a million different ways. You want to think about the funnel stage or the bow tie stage. Use those synonymously. So on the awareness side, the metric is post engagement, email opens, ad impressions, and then establish whatever target rate you want. In our example, it's north of 3% engagement or 30% open. Interest would be the lead magnet click-through rate or downloads, which you want to see, or, these are arbitrary, but you want to find base rates if you can. These are based on base rates. But, north of 20% click-through rate, north of 30% download rate. And then you look at conversions, which would be replies, meetings booked. And you're looking for, above 8% reply, above 5% meeting booked. And then inbound is direct mentions of podcast or content. It's just straight up inbound lead forms. And ideally there's some type of way to screen that. How'd you hear about us? Keep that basic as shit, because you don't want to introduce any unnecessary friction there, but that's another one. And then this should be on a dashboard that you look at probably weekly as a group, but it's not one you stare at daily. Slow and steady wins the race. And so we'll look at it every week. After, 2 weeks, we'll see if there's any calibrations that are obvious. After 4 weeks, we'll start to think about which one's producing better or whatever. but this is probably like a 90-day kind of thing because you want to let the stuff burn.
One other shameless plug for the inbound side. I would also recommend, let's say someone doesn't actually show the real intent that you're looking for, where it's submitting a form to get entered into your funnel. But you're noticing they're just hitting your website regularly, but they just haven't taken that next step. That's a perfect opportunity for you to ID all of the visitors that are coming to your website, start to identify a pattern in repeat visits, and then you take that opportunity to reach out to them. If you're noticing they just keep getting to the page, they get to the form, but they're just not clicking submit, perfect opportunity for you to reach out.
And you can just continue to just shrink the thing that you're measuring. It's like, okay, cool. So this gets to here and this gets to here, then something weird happens here. Okay, cool. Let's stare at that and let's tinker around and see if we can improve that. And this is like CRO, meaning conversion rate optimization. So this is when you get out your scalpel, and you get surgical with it. All right, so quick implementation guide, and then we'll jump in. So not much more to cover here, but so audit your channel performance. If you have surface area to measure, do it. It's like, yeah, our LinkedIn sucks, but these emails are pretty solid. Cool. Like, which channels have the strongest signal? What messages or offers have resonated the most? And where do you have existing momentum? Straight up. Then start to establish a growth hypothesis. So this is based on that foundational work. We've got our ICP. We did the content mapping. We produced the 3 or 4 assets we think are the most productive. We've got a point of view on a lead magnet. What specific problem or pain point consistently triggers response? And remember, it's firmographics like ICP is like table stakes. It's a prerequisite. So the analogy we use a lot is like, you might know your type, but it doesn't matter if he or she is married. What you're looking for is the conditions that create opportunity. It's like, oh, actually, they just broke up. Cool. Now you're in business. So you want to be looking for kind of those elements that trigger change, that increase the probability that this is a priority. And that's where it gets more persona centric. It gets more dynamic observation instead of static. Like a lot of firmographic stuff is static, where it's like they have this much revenue, this many employees. The other one is like, oh man, they just put up 10 job postings, or oh, they just bought another business or whatever. So you want to kind of have that ear to the street. And then design the loop architecture. Here are the two, or you can refer back to the 2 examples we got. Make sure everybody across the different roles is assigned clear ownership for all of it. Most important is that there's just clear measurement in place. And then accountability will get you to where you want to be, but analytics and visibility is the name of the game. And then that's it. You move on to your measurement framework. We touched on that. And then an iteration cadence. So it's probably just like a weekly look. Like, can we tune any of the channel level stuff? Oh, this one email is performing better than the other. Cool. Let's tune it. This ad is terrible. Cut it.
Yep.
And again, like, we're always optimizing for results and return on effort, return on investment, however you want to think about it. But we're also very okay paying to learn to a degree. So you want to appreciate that a good chunk of this is sunk cost, and the result is extraordinary learning on what not to do.
Yep.
And that's very productive. So when to scale, when to kill. So just some general questions. ICP alignment. Are we reaching the right people? Learning value. Are we validating our growth hypothesis? Measurability. Are we collecting clean signal? Repeatability. Can this scale into a core GDM motion? And that's that.
Yeah, very well put.
Kjael, what did we leave out? What did we leave out, bud?
No, I think this pretty much covers all of it to the learning context. The only point I would add there is think of it all as an investment. You don't get results without first making mistakes and failing in certain areas. So what you want to do is just make sure that your systems are totally detailed out. You understand what it is that you're measuring. You understand where a lot of the effort is being put in on a day-to-day basis, especially if it's something that's content-led. And you look for certain levers that you can pull where it's you can minimize your input and maximize your outputs. For example, with the content-led strategy, what you can do is a backlinking strategy. Right? Where is some of the traffic coming from other authority sources that might be talking about something similar? Maybe there's a guest podcasting or guest posting opportunity in that, where it's just not you putting all of your own content together to drive traffic. Go hack some other communities where similar topics may be being discussed. So understand where your visitors or your ICP, understand where they live, how they engage with the content, based on where they're going to source that content, and then see if there's an opportunity for you to jump into that community and share what you have going on. But get very creative in how you build these systems, and then also just think of it as experiments, like we've been saying. Results take time. Results come with certain failure points. It's all on you to invest that time and energy to figure it all out to get to the results.
Dude, that was really, really well said, buddy. Yeah, so you call out a big distinction too. Like if we call kind of one strategy like the audience community led thing, the big decision point up front is like, does this audience like, where we're selling to religious people, where are the churches? It's like, oh, there aren't any churches. Let's make our own. But if there are some churches, see if you can do some guest pay to hang out at those churches and give people stuff that's really valuable. So there's a big decision point between like, do we need to build this, or is this something that we can, however, in some kind of capacity participate in? There's already the type of discussion we want to be a participant in. So that's a really, really good distinction.
Yeah, and the participation will also give you quick and early signals to know, is it worth building this myself, or can I just hang out here and generate a ton of results from community hacking?
Totally. All right, my guy. For the love of the game. Dude, is it dual laser time? We're in that. Let's go. Dual laser time.
It still didn't come on. How do
You gotta put them next to your head.
Next to my head.
You might have to back up. Like, let the robot just. Yeah, there you go. Come on. There it is.
Okay, let's try it one more time. We gotta get it dual this time.
Right, ready?
Okay,
1,
3,
2,
2, 1.
Oh, I jumped the gun again. Come on. There they are. Double lasers. Let's go. Oh. All right, buddy. Always a pleasure, man. You have an outstanding rest of the week. See you next time.
And you as well.
Cheers. Peace.